My name is Jason Toll from Simon Fraser University. This is Janine Hertz from University of British Columbia, Okanagan, and we'd like to welcome you to the Little Workshop of Horrors. There will be sound effects. To begin, I'd like to acknowledge the ancestral, traditional, and unceded Aboriginal territories of the Coast Salish peoples, in particular the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations of Metro Vancouver, on whose territory we work, live, and play, and on whose territory we stand. We'd also like to thank very much the Center for Digital Media for opening their doors for us today. An amazing venue, I think we can all agree, and the team here have been outstanding and generous with their support from the get-go. In partnership with BCCampus, our generous sponsors here, who along with the financial support bring an amazing team of organizers and are responsible for everything from the food, the treats, the wayfinding, and about 1,000 other details that I can't even begin to mention. We'd also like to thank the Stewardship Committee of the Educational Technology Users Group. This is a group of individuals from across the province, post-secondary institutions, who volunteered their time, energy, and passion for this community and really make these workshops happen. And last but not least, to all the presenters. When we decided on this theme of failure, we sort of did so, it was almost a cavalier, oh yeah, let's get them to come and tell all their fail stories. We didn't realize quite the sensitivity and the risks that people were taking. So we appreciate all of your support in supporting them and supporting their stories with you today. So I'm going to pass the mic to Janine, who will give you a bit of a layout of our day. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. Looking forward to the day. It's going to be amazing. So just if you want to access the Wi-Fi, you're going to find Game Jam. Your password is GameJam1.
And Edurome works fine.
And Edurome works fine. Thank you, Mike. And if you want to tweet about your day, we always use hashtag etug. And there is a hashtag free2fail, FREETOFAIL, if you want to share a free-to-fail story on Twitter or point to a video. And just a couple housekeeping things. So the washrooms are back here, and I take it the alarm has been disabled. Good. So it won't sound every time you go. The coffee and food is at the back. Help yourself. There are cans for trash and also cans for recycling. And so Jason talked about our dynamic and enthusiastic, passionate steering committee members. We had an all-day meeting yesterday, and the passion came up that suddenly they wanted to do a wall and ask, we're going to do a dot-mocracy. So think about this through the day. There are some dots up there, and there are pens. And you can vote for how important it is about networking with expertise in the community, about ongoing communications, if you like email, newsletters, that type of thing. And we're also looking, we were thinking it might be fun to create a tagline for our group. We're known as etug, and to a lot of members outside our community, they don't really know what that is. And that's the Educational Technology User Group of British Columbia. And so we thought a tagline, kind of educating British Columbia or something, a tagline. So if you have some ideas, go ahead and write them down. And I'd actually really like to acknowledge and thank Tracy Kelly from BCCampus, because while the group had this idea to do this yesterday, it was Tracy who was lugging in paper and pens and drawing up there and setting this thing up. It became her project, and she did this while in her boots that are way too cool. I can't even stand beside her. So thank you very much, Tracy. All right, so we're going to have a keynote. We're going to have a break. We'll have lightning rounds, then lunch, and we'll have a presentation by the CDM students. Demo posters in the afternoon. People can set up after lunch. And then we'll have a closing fun activity with Patrick Penfather. And we'll try and get everybody out of here by 4. Thompson Rivers University, Brian Lamb, if he could come on up here and introduce our keynote for us. Thanks, Brian.
Where is the DJ? Okay. I've had this DJ work with me on a talk or two in the past, and it's super fun, and I can't wait to see what this DJ does. So before I introduce our keynote, could we thank our DJ, Dr. Jones? So our kickoff speaker today is the real deal. Audrey doesn't have a university job. She's not a visionary in residence at some Silicon Valley company. There's no foundation backing her work. She earns her living in the incredible lucrative world of freelance writing. I know EdTech work is really prized by editors when they budget stuff out. And in speaking gigs like this, so thankfully etug, as you know, pays its keynotes so much. So Audrey is beholden to nobody, and that's why I'm so grateful that she does what she does. And she does it in her newsletters, she does it in articles. We're getting ready for the series of pieces called the Annual Year in Review, which to me is some of the most essential writing in EdTech every single year. In particular, one of the ones she does is a piece where she lays out who's investing in EdTech and why, and what companies are they investing in, and how is that resulting in the products that are coming to our communities. Nobody else does that work. You know, if you've been reading those for a few years, and then you saw her piece like a week ago talking about Trump donor to the north of $1 million, Peter Thiel, and his investments in EdTech, I don't know, it strikes me as stuff we should be interested in, but I don't see anyone else even coming close to doing it. She also does the Tech Gypsies podcast with Ken Lane, which I love. Just in any given year, if I think, what are the 10 best pieces of EdTech writing I've seen in the last year? It's pretty usual that Audrey's written about 5 of them, at least. And usually given 2 or 3 of the best talks as well. So I'm going to predict she's going to make us uncomfortable. I've seen her 4 or 5 times, and if history serves, some of us will be full-on offended. But again, that's why I'm so grateful she is in this space. I'm so glad she works in the EdTech field, and I am so, so glad she is here at etug. Audrey, thank you.
Thank you. I am so thrilled to be here today, and I also want to say that thank you very much to Jason for DJing. When he asked me if I would speak to you, I actually said only if you DJ. And I'm thrilled because I actually believe that sort of life should have a lot more musical theater to it, and keynotes should probably have a little bit, keynotes should have a lot more drama than they do. And thank you for the willingness to tackle the theme of this event as well. A willingness to talk about struggling with EdTech and a willingness to talk about failure, rather than what's almost always the case, this sort of strange dogma that we have in EdTech that demands that we only offer praise, right? That we only offer thanks, and that we sort of bask in the glory of the shininess of education technology. And like Brian said, in the face of that dogma, I do feel like my keynotes are often received with shudders and squirms. No one wants to make eye contact. With me, it's really kind of awkward. After my talk, I sometimes have people come up to me and with this like combination of like panic and shyness with like, holy shit, what am I doing with my life? I don't always mean to frighten people. I mean, I do. I do. And I definitely want to shock people. I think that actually is the role of the keynote speaker, right? This isn't church. I want to shock people the same way that the avant-garde did, right? Avant-garde artists who wanted to defamiliarize things. And that's what I want to do. I want us to defamiliarize education technology, to make the familiar unfamiliar, right? to detourn, to disrupt. And in particular, I want to disrupt Silicon Valley disruption. But today I've been asked to talk about monsters and monstrosity. I've been actually sanctioned to do so, which is kind of odd. So I'm not sure I can be completely shocking under these circumstances. I will try to be brutally frank. I can't help it. And since it's almost Halloween, I will be frighteningly frank at times. I've written 2 books on the monsters of education technology. I'm publishing a 3rd this year. My academic background, if I have an official institutional credential, is actually in folklore. So while I am not officially institutionally credentialed to speak or talk or write about education technology, I've never taken a class on the subject. I do have a master's degree in folklore, which means I get to say scholarly things about monsters, and you have to take it seriously, right? And my background in folklore definitely does influence my interest in storytelling. And I think that that's something that we need to pay attention to. What are the stories that are being told about education technology? What are the stories that we tell to cajole, right? To frame, admonish, ordain, encourage, frighten, teach. So let me talk really briefly about the history of folklore studies, not to tout my academic qualifications in order to speak about monsters, but I want to talk about the monstrosity of academic disciplines. And there have been some calls recently that education technology needs to become a discipline, which I guess implies that the field is not one already, despite all the journals and all the departments and all the degrees and all the jobs and all the conferences and all the events like this. But I guess it's not a real discipline, something. The rationale is that it needs to be more prestigious, right? And that is key, I think, to the initiative. How can education technologists get more respect, more power, more money? So I want that to be the subtext to this talk, right? I want us to keep in mind, how do academic disciplines emerge? How have they managed to convince universities' administrative and intellectual infrastructure that they are legitimate? And then how historically have technologies emerged, right? How have they managed to convince the university's administrative and intellectual infrastructure that they are legitimate? For academic disciplines, this involves a couple of rhetorical tactics. I contend you either reach back and you tie your field to antiquity, right? You invoke Socrates. Or you reach forward and you say, this is science. Folklore actually did both. A little bit of history. Around the turn of the 20th century, folklorists, like most academics at the time, became really enthralled with creating classification systems, right? In the 1920s, American folklorist Stith Thompson translated a system that had been developed by a Finnish folklorist. He organized and identified folk narratives into tale or motif types. And we recognize these from stories. The clever fox, the quest for a lost bride, the magic ring, the golden goose, the fool's errand, the dragon slayer. Not a list of titles, but a classification system of tale types, of all tale types. They fit into these neat little categories. Right? A Soviet folklorist named Vladimir Prop responded he didn't like that particular index. He wrote his own book in the 1920s called The Morphology of the Folktale. He identified 31 functions, right? So not the titles of tales again, but the things that happen in tales that move the story forward, right? Someone's in the hero's family goes missing. There's an interdiction. The hero goes on a quest, right? Or a journey. The hero has to face a villain. The hero has to obtain a magical item. There's a battle. The hero is victorious, and so on again. We recognize the structure. We recognize the types. We kind of like classification systems. It's comforting, right? It's organized. It seems scholarly, and it's science. And that's what's important to note here, right? To classify these types, these tail types and their function, makes the study of folklore to be very rigorous, very scientific. And for its part, the field of education and the field of education technology did something quite the same around the same period. Education develops its own classification systems. We've churned out all sorts of rankings and graphs and charts. We do science. We have little ticks and numbers that prove it, right? And our current obsession with education data has its roots in that very same effort to quantify, to make it scientific. So think about it. How do you turn a craft, a practice, into a discipline? You invoke history, right? But more importantly, you invoke science. You measure things. And as the 20th century progressed, another tactic became clear: you add machines. I want to point out that we have also added monsters. Right? Unpredictable, wild, terrible, unsettling. I don't summon these monsters to classify them. They are too unruly, and I'm uninterested in rule. But rather to name them, and then to unname them, and to wake us up from EdTech's nightmare. I could, I suppose, sketch out a taxonomy of sorts of education technology's monsters. That would be the scientific thing to do, right? To underscore the types of tales we tell. The young entrepreneur, right? The successful scholar. The evil blackboard. We know these tale types, right? I could construct a morphology of monsters, right? But I actually have no interest in ordering them or hierarchy. I just want to unravel the pretense that this is science, right? I want to unleash us from the ways in which academia and our monsters want to discipline us. See, I don't want us to become Max, that little boy who was sent to bed without any supper in Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are, right? That is, we shouldn't aim to be the king of monsters by growling and shouting and convincing them that we could be just as horrid and fierce. I don't want us to long for that wild rumpus, right? That celebratory joining in of monsters. Because I don't want us to think about taming or disciplining or mastery or some sort of fanciful storybook ending where there actually is a warm supper and we all feel good because order has actually been unchanged. I want us to refuse to be disciplined, right? I want us to be wild, but I just don't want us to be monstrous. So when I conjure these monsters, it's an acknowledgement, an alchemical acknowledgement. I'm not in academia, so I can use alchemy, it doesn't matter. Of science studies scholar Donna Haraway and the computer scientist Seymour Papert. These monsters are figures for us to think with, right? Epistemological markers. They're not just narratives, they're not just motifs. Any assembly or disassembly of monsters also for me relies on the work of Bruno Latour and his argument that we have misread the most famous literary monster of all times, the main character in Mary Shelley's 1818 novel, Frankenstein. Indeed, we often mistake Dr. Frankenstein for his creation, right? We call the latter Frankenstein. We tend to read the book as a cautionary tale of what happens when science has gone awry. But as Latour has argued, we misjudge Frankenstein's crime. It was not that he invented a creature through some sort of combination of hubris and technology, but rather he abandoned the creature. He abandoned the creature to himself. Remember that I am thy creature, the creature says when he confronts the scientist. I ought to be thy Adam, but rather I am a fallen angel, whom thou drivest from joy, for no misdeed. Everywhere I see bliss, from which I am alone and irrevocably excluded. I was benevolent and good, but misery made me a fiend. left alone to discover the world, to educate himself, the creature became a monster. And we have created technological and scientific monsters because, like Dr. Frankenstein, we have forgotten to love and care for our technological and scientific creations. We have forgotten to love and care for one another. These are our monsters. These are the monsters of education technology. So what follows is not a taxonomy, it's not a morphology, it's just some monsters that I've noticed, just some monsters that I've seen as I've traveled through the nightmarish hellscape of education technology. The zombies of education technology. I love this. Books will soon be obsolete in schools. Thomas Edison, 1913. What's great is that we keep seeing this, right? Over the next few years, textbooks should be obsolete, said the US Secretary of Education in 2012. 100 years later, undead ideas still reign. Here's another one from Thomas Edison, a quote. "I believe that the motion picture is destined to revolutionize our education system, and that in a few years it will largely supplant, if not entirely, the use of textbooks. I should say that on average we get about 2% efficiency out of school books as they are written today. The education of the future, as I see it, will be conducted through the medium of the motion picture, where it will be possible to obtain 100% efficiency." 1922. Thomas Friedman, 2013. "Nothing has more potential to enable us to reimagine higher education than the massive open online course, or MOOC, platforms that are being developed by the likes of Stanford and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and companies like Coursera and Udacity." Undead, right? Zombie ideas, according to Nobel Prize winner Paul Krugman, are the, quote, "beliefs about policy that have been repeatedly refuted with evidence and analysis, but refuse to die," right? The American political landscape, the Canadian political landscape, I'm sure, full of them. The history of education technology is crawling with these monsters. If you've worked in a field long enough, you recognize the undead of edtech, right? These monsters that, despite our very best effort, our refusals, our outcry, our challenges, just keep coming back. Learning objects, learning portals, portals to learning object repositories. Die. Sometimes we think we vanish them, right? But the zombies, they seem to wither and go away, but then a few years later, they resurface, and they're in the headlines again, right? Wouldn't it be awesome if we could hold college lectures in virtual reality? Seriously? I thought we killed that with Second Life. It's back. Wouldn't it be awesome if students could watch moving images about other places and other cultures? But now, with their Android phone, strapped to their forehead, again, it's VR. Weird. The most powerful of education zombies is, of course, the student information system and its monstrous offspring, the learning management system. Reviled, utterly reviled. Yet these monsters have become part of schools' infrastructure, embedded in the way in which we imagine, not just administer, the relationships between teachers and the course and the institution. The zombie has become so banal, right, that we cannot actually tell the story of education technology without it. Another monster. The vampires of education technology. Both the learning management system and the student information system could also be categorized as another form of undead, right? Every time you hear someone say student data, I want you to imagine student lifeblood instead. Vampires, right? These are the monsters that live off our digital lives, feeding off our personal data, the monsters that are most sanguine about the promises of data extraction and analysis. These are the monsters that hope to extend their own existence, their own relevance by normalizing surveillance, the ambient collection of all sorts of data, through devices that promise more efficiency, promise better outcomes. The lure, of course, of the vampire, the supernatural power. But that power comes from stealing life from others. The vampire of education technology might convince us to do their bidding, but they can only sustain themselves through extraction and exploitation. Conveniently, they're so powerful they can't even see their own reflection in the mirror. They're totally unaware. Vampires are normalized, I think, in some ways, but we get a sense when we're around them that something super creepy is happening. And that's the same with vampires. We just sort of know that something isn't right. The ghosts of education technology. There is a specter haunting education technology, the specter of behaviorism. Actually, there are several specters. The specter of venture capitalism, the specter of racism, the specter of imperialism, the specter of war, the specter of libertarianism, the specter of individualism, the specter of instructivism, the specter of elitism. I could go on. Lots of ghosts, right? The ghosts of education technologies past, the ghosts of education technologies present, the ghosts of education yet to come, the ghosts of failed projects, the ghosts of broken promises, the haunted closet where all the overhead projectors and Mimeo machines and discarded machines reside that we don't want to open. The giants of education technology. Don't tweet this part. No. Papert, Pask, Montessori, Minsky, Mitra, Skinner, Suppies, Siemens, Schenck, Kay, Kaplan, Kohler, Kahn, Katzman, Cormier, Dewey, Thorndike, Thrun, Gates, Gardner, Groom, Agarwal, Bushnell, Bruner, Bloom, Zuckerberg, Piaget, Katinsky, Chasen, Wiley, Rousseau, Illich, Ing, Downs, so many men. Some of these names are, as giants, almost unassailable. Some of these are big, friendly giants, no doubt. Some of them are not. The mad scientists of education technology. I could actually just repeat some of those names I just said, but I'll be a little more vague, right? The mad scientists of education are those who experiment on students, those who experiment on public education. They do so for their own ego. They isolate themselves in their laboratories, in their towers, in their executive corner offices, distancing themselves from any sort of ethical core. They build machines, they model, and aim to mold mankind. They believe that they're on the cusp of building a world, a new world, a world in which they will have control. The trolls of education technology. Okay, maybe the trolls are mine to battle? I don't know. Maybe you see them too. I hope not, actually. I face them all the time, particularly on Twitter. This is also why I removed comments from my website. Trolls, as we know, live under bridges and in comment sections on the internet. Women, particularly women of color, are assaulted by trolls constantly online. We need to recognize that there are trolls when we compel our students to work online. Trolls don't. Sorry. Sometimes they do, actually. The trolls of education technology fish for fights, right? They start arguments just to anger and upset people with intentionally inflammatory messages. Wait, Audrey, isn't that what you do? No, that's not what I do, actually. I start arguments in order to make the world a better place, right? I'm not starting arguments just to sow discord. Right? The trolls of education technology don't even believe in what they say. Yet they'll always summon their friend, the straw man. Where did the trolls of education technology live? In a well, actually. It's a Twitter joke, never mind. The clowns of education technology. Okay, clowns are not necessarily monstrous. Clowns can make us laugh, right? Clowns are jokers and jesters. They challenge and mock political authority. Clowns are kin to tricksters, those mythological creatures that make and break the world. There's a whole pantheon of tricksters, right? Mischievous, chaotic, deceptive, witty, lewd, sacred, profane. Some tricksters are humbugs, as P.T. Barnum proudly described himself. They don't lie per se, but they lure you into their circus tents with fanciful stories and promises. They just want you to hear what they've got to sell you. They're showmen, the ones who sell you sea monkeys that are actually goddamn brine shrimp, right? They're snake oil salesmen. The ones that promise you that their adaptive teaching software can semi-read your mind and we, quote, literally know everything about what you know and how you learn best everything. The ones who wave their hands as they make sweeping proclamations about the future of education, desperately hoping you don't peek behind the curtain and see that they are not a great and mighty wizard. They're a clown. The blob. Monstrous education technology is the blob, right? This corrosive alien substance of unknown origin that consumes everything in its path, right? It's almost impossible to stop. It's almost impossible to fight. No one knows how it started, but it rolls through the streets, rolls through our schools. There's a tsunami coming, as Stanford President John Hennessy put it, when the massive open online blob lurched out of Palo Alto, oozing through the pages of the Chronicle of Higher Education and the Wall Street Journal, and into the administrative offices of many, many college campuses. Software is eating the world, as investor Mark Andreessen has gleefully proclaimed. The blob is obsessed with scale. It must always grow, always extend its reach. The blob dominates through massiveness, through expansion, through fear and horror and technological imperialism. Mook Cthulhu. Okay, so Cthulhu is the mythical creature created by the writer H.P. Lovecraft. Cthulhu is this malevolent, cosmic creature. It first appeared in a pulp fiction magazine, Weird Tales, in 1928. Lovecraft described a statue of Cthulhu as, quote, a monster of vaguely anthropoid outline, but with an octopus-like head, whose face was a mass of feelers, a scaly, rubbery-looking body, prodigious claws on hind and forefeet, and long, narrow wings behind. Just looking at Cthulhu drives a person crazy. But even without eye contact, Cthulhu is said to be the cause of ongoing and perpetual anxiety among humans. Right? One literary theorist, Noel Carroll, he has a classification of monsters, but I'm not classifying monsters. This might fall under what he called magnification, a giant octopoid, right? It's akin of other monstrous creatures like Godzilla and King Kong. Or maybe he's an example of what Carroll called massification, right? That's what I'm going with here, massification, right? Even though Carroll used it to describe like swarms of monsters, like swarms of worms or swarms of zombies, swarms of birds. The massification of Cthulhu as a monster of education technology gives us Mook Cthulhu, that terrifying monster that paralyzed us starting in 2012, filled us with anxiety, and threaten to bring about the final disruption of education's end times. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed in everywhere. The ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction. The worst are full of passionate intensity. The rough beast, Yeats cautions, is coming, bringing with it suffering and despair. Education technology salespeople from Silicon Valley love this end times apocalyptic rhetoric, right? They tell stories about the end times all the time. Harvard Business School professors and Stanford University presidents, they tell stories of disruptive innovation, right, of tsunamis that are going to wipe out institutions. Soon, half of all colleges will be bankrupt, they predict. Soon, there will only be 10 colleges left in the world. Soon, education will be automated, personalized, with students hardwired to some matrix-like machine, all uttering in that deadpan Keanu Reeves voice, "Whoa, I know calculus. Whoa, I can code. Whoa, I know kung fu." The robots of education technology. The robots, they're coming for our jobs. They're going to drive our cars and order our groceries and diagnose our disease and vacuum our floors and teach our children, or so we're told. The robots of education technology sometimes boast of their great artificial intelligence. They don't want us to think too deeply about what we mean when we talk about intelligence, or how intertwined the history of intelligence testing is with eugenics. The robots of education technology boast of machine learning. They create frameworks and models for learning that they try to fit humans into in turn. This is the monster of standardization. The robots of education technology, like many of these monsters, love speed and efficiency. The robots of education technology watch our clicks. They analyze our preferences. The robots of education technology are teaching machines and testing machines and surveillance machines. Okay, I'd be totally remiss if I didn't mention my favorite monster. I got a little soft spot for this creature, the beloved pigeon. Right. Symbols of decay and disorder, weaponized by the military and by education psychologists. We forget, of course, that doves and pigeons are the same bird. They're symbols of peace. Neither fully domesticated nor completely wild. As I've argued elsewhere, pigeons are a companion species gone astray, a border creature that might mark its own and our own trainability, right? A reminder of what happens when we believe our fantasies about monsters and cyborgs, and despite the sort of promise of being subversive, we find ourselves quite submissive to technologies of command and control. We train pigeons, right? We curb their desire in order that they become compliant. Our training devices and our practices are monstrous. It's no surprise that in return, pigeons cover our streets and our statues in shit. The dragons of education technology. We've been warned, right, of the dragons in dangerous places, the unexplored places, the overexplored places, the stagnant, the lands of outmoded ideas, the places where we should not venture. Hic sunt Dracones, right? Here be dragons. Instead of avoiding the margins, staying safely in the confines of what we know, I'd argue we need to face our dragons. We need to face our monsters. We need to face the giants, right? They aren't simply at the margins. They are central to the narratives that we're telling about education technology. one narrative, one story that I return to again and again is this keynote speech that the science fiction writer Bruce Sterling delivered a couple of years ago. He spoke about fantasy prototypes and the real disruption. The theme of that event was Here Be Dragons. And in his keynote, he offered what he admitted was probably a really painful message for an audience full of entrepreneurs and designers, right? An audience that the conference itself described as digital forethinkers and tech experts. Sterling said, and this is the truth, those that live by disruption die by disruption. Those that live by disruption die by disruption. And I've spoken a lot about disruption in the last few years, not in terms of design fiction like Sterling does, but again in terms of folklore. I want us to link the stories of edtech disruption, Silicon Valley's apocalyptic beliefs, its millennialism, its end times fantasy. Sterling links them to dragons. I want to link them to monsters, right? Bruce Sterling is really clear that startup culture lives in the belly of a fiery, destructive, disruptive beast. All this entrepreneurial exuberance, he says, is actually, quote, a tacit allegiance between the hackerspace favelas of the startups and offshore capital and tax avoidance money laundries. And what were they doing, Sterling says? They were building a globalized network society. That's what's coming, he says, an actual globalized networked society. A globalized network society that the 1% envisions, the technology investors, the venture capitalists, the bankers, those vampires, right? It's not a progressive society. It's not an egalitarian society. It's not a transgressive society, despite all their stories, right? And all the stories that we tell ourselves when we do their bidding, when we use their products, when we fatten their wallets, when we feed their monsters. This globalized network society is about a system of finer-tuned surveillance and control, thanks to the technologies that we readily adopt and we force our students to adopt. It's about extraction of our data, lifeblood, right? It's about turning every moment of our lives into some sort of transaction, a transaction for profit and for profiling. Startups tell themselves otherwise. That's what they sell us, of course. They say that they're here to challenge the system, challenge the man, but we are all auto-colonialized by the austerity, says Bruce Sterling. And that's your big dragon. That's what he told his audience. That's your actual dragon. As long as you are making rich guys richer, you are not disrupting the austerity. You are one of its top facilitators. And these are startups' dragons. These are the technology industry's dragons. These are the dragons of education technology, too. As long as you're making the rich guys richer, and the smart kids smarter, and the rich, smart kids richer and smarter, you are not disrupting the austerity. You are one of its top facilitators. Whether we like it or not, these are our monsters. Okay, so clearly, I see these monsters all the time. I fret that others don't. I fret that others are pretty happy to curry favor with monsters, to leave gifts for them, to offer them students as sacrifices, to take gifts from them, to wear their swag, right? I joke sometimes that I'm called Edtech's Cassandra, but that's a serious and an awful name and role to invoke. And I cringe to do so. I mean, things didn't work out so well for Cassandra, right? I'm not pleased that by being Edtech's Cassandra, that I'm placing myself in this sort of tale of destruction and death. It's been a decade since I left academia, thank God. I don't look back, ever. But I can't ever seem to escape my training as a folklorist. I'm not sure I'd want to. I'm fascinated by storytelling, fascinated by tradition, by culture, by mythology, by rituals, and I recognize that traditions are fragile. Culture changes, right? And I know too that traditions Beliefs are terribly resistant. Culture is resilient. People refuse to change. Humans have long told stories of monsters. Monsters who live on the edges, on the outskirts, those who defy expectations of appearance or behavior, monsters who transgress, they disobey, they defile, they destroy. As Cassandra, I warn you of education technology's monsters. They will bring about our doom. The monsters of education technology are in many ways a Trojan horse, right? Poised to dismantle the things that we value. Public education, for example. To outsource, to unbundle, to disrupt, to destroy. Right? You've been warned. Education technology is full of monsters, and we've given birth to them, right? We made them. We gave birth to the story that everyone has to be online. We've demanded that everyone have their own device. We've demanded that everyone use the learning management system. We did that. That's on us. Look what we've done, right? Look what we've done. We have welcomed these monsters into our schools, into our classrooms, into our homes. But we needn't, right? We needn't accept the monstrosity of technology. Remember Dr. Frankenstein. Technology, education technology is our creation. It doesn't have to be a monster. We don't have to do monstrous things to students, right? Education technology, like Frankenstein's monster, requires our deliberate and loving attention. We have to care, otherwise it becomes monstrous. We have to care so that it becomes marvelous, right? That we have to fight. We have to be undisciplined. We have to build better monsters, or excuse me, we can't build monsters. We have to build better technologies, right? We have to care more, and we have to tell different stories about science and technology. Thank you.